Love finances the other F word and want to support the show? Become a patron by going to patreon.com/FTOFW. You'll get special features, a shout out on the air, and early releases. Or if you prefer, pick up some merchandise at financestheotherfword.com.
As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Okay. Wow, that was a lot fucking easier than last time. What's up, guys? Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word on this beautiful morning. Zoe had some teeth action going on, and now her teeth is going to be beautiful, not at all like British people's teeth normally are.
Oh, la, la, la. Yes, I had extreme dental work done yesterday, and I looked like I had a stroke. So forgive me, that's why we're doing this today and not yesterday, and why I am Zooming it, because I'm still in recovery mode.
Yes. So she will be having more dental work, but she is here bright and chipper. So today we are going to talk about the oligarchs and who the fuck are they and why the fuck are they. But before we do that, let's talk about Kim Kardashian's tweet celebrating International Women's Day. Did you hear about this, Zoe?
I did not. I mean, I heard about International Women's Day because I am a woman, but I did not hear about Kim K.
Okay.
Tell
so
me.
Check this out. So first of all, this was brought to my attention by Marianne, because she keeps up on this stuff more than I do, and I don't give three fucks about Kim Kardashian. So this is what she tweeted in celebration of International Women's Day. I have the best advice for women and business. Get your fucking ass up and work. It seems like nobody wants to work these days. End quote. Okay. Hold on. Then her elder sister, Kourtney Kardashian, chimes in and says she agrees. And she says, that is so true. You have to surround yourself with people who want to work.
Oh, God. The day I start taking advice from that family is the day that roll over and die.
But the thing is that, and most people, of course, were and are continuing to be very unkind to Kim, which, quite frankly, I think she deserves. And some people are coming to her aid saying, no, okay, well, yes, she was given a lot of stuff, but, she still worked really hard. Fuck you. If you were, it would be like me going over to a third world country and being like, you know what, maybe you wouldn't be starving and destitute and poor if you just worked harder. Like, are you fucking serious? Like, you have to understand that you come from a privileged place. And as Americans, we come from a very privileged place, as we're seeing that what is happening with the Russians, the Russian people, not Putin, and the Ukrainians and everything that's going on with them. And the war, of course, is very decisive. And I have a
divisive.
Yes, exactly.
Divisive. Yeah.
Divisive, decisive. It's all those things. It's all those things. Yeah, there's people on Twitter giving me shit because on one of the episodes, I instead of saying spread, I said spreaded. And he's like, oh, fuck, spreaded is not a word. And I'm like, look, you motherfucker, I'm giving information. So why don't you eat it and shut the fuck up for me? But of course, I'm not going to respond like that because
you're a lady.
I'm a lady. And because TikTok keeps trying to ban me for inappropriate language.
As if Mel could ever be accused of inappropriate language. That's just so wrong.
Fucking ridiculous. But so let's start out with a little quick story. So I have a associate who is Republican and very good man. Diehard Trumper, but still very good man. When this whole thing with Ukraine started, he was like, if we lose one American life over there, blah, blah, Biden, and, just really pissed off, let Russia have Ukraine because Ukraine is, this, that, and the other thing. And then I spoke to him the other day and I asked him, hey, what do you think? And he was like, I don't understand why we're not just fighting Russia. We would destroy their armies. We could go into Ukraine and we could squash them like a bug. And so the point I'm making out of all of this, you guys, is that this is a very, very divisive time. And the thing is that there's a lot of people out there so that disagree. And so let me just, it got me to thinking like because of course in my head, and I probably shouldn't put this on recording, but it's true. I'm like, why can't somebody just go assassinate him? Like, why can't you just assassinate Putin and fuck this? This guy's got his finger on the trigger on nuclear war. It is literally from my 80s babies. This is Reagan all over again. And I'm like, why don't we just go in and assassinate him? Which, we've already talked about my feelings on human life in past episodes. Not super great track record. Gotta be real. Gotta be real. Wait till we get to the Planned Parenthood one. Woo, you guys are gonna fucking hate me then. But right now you can just hate me just a little bit. So let's talk about who the oligarchs are, how they were formed, what the fuck they are, what the fuck they do. Okay. So obviously, the oligarchs are the most richest and elite people of Russia. And we know that just by the sheer mention of the word oligarchs. But I don't think you guys have understood the different ways in which they have come about and how they are ingratiated, if that's the term, Zoe, into American society.
Yep, you can use that word. It's a great word.
Oh my God, there's a level 6 word right there. Fucking ingratiated. Look at that shit. Nipples hard. Yeah, fucking nipple action this early in the morning. So they are obviously, again, the elites of Russia. Some of them hold positions in government, but they're mainly puppet positions. They don't really do anything. And they also hold positions in government corporations. Let me move my notes here so that I can see them a little bit. Now, some of the oligarchs were created actually in 1990. So for those of you who might remember, Russia was at one point the USSR. And we saw the collapse of the USSR in the 90s, early 90s, right after the end of the taking down of the Berlin Wall, which, of course, birthed one of my most disliked Scorpion songs, Wind of Change.
I love that song.
You would, because it was very emotional for them to see the Berlin Wall come down. Obviously, they're German. I love the Scorpions, but that song, when it comes on, I have to fast forward it.
I have to turn it up and sing it with that German accent.
Do you whistle?
No, because I don't like whistling. Don't whistle around me. It annoys me.
Okay, that's a little bizarre, but Michelle has the same thing. If people whistle, she says it's like nails on a chalkboard, and she gets immensely pissed off.
I'm with Michelle on that one.
Yeah, you guys are both weird with that. So when the USSR was collapsing, the federal government needed money in order to, Russia's federal government needed money in order to shore up their debt. And so what we saw that the oligarchs came in and they gave money to the Russian government in order to help shore up their books, which this might sound a little weird to you, unless you remember Men Who Built America, where we saw that JP Morgan Chase did the same thing, that Chase went in and the American government was almost completely broke. And he went in, and him and all his cronies raised up enough money that they were able to put the United States back together and square on their debt. Okay. So we've seen this with America too. So what ended up happening, of course, is that the Russian government defaulted on the loans and the oligarchs got all the assets. And so then the oligarchs, as you do, and Warren Buffett, this is how he made his money, is going into different companies that were getting ready to go bankrupt and doing a fire sale of the assets. So when they sold off the assets, they sold off most of them to themselves. And so they became owners and, mercantile magnates, like we saw in the Men Who Built America episode. Then what we see the second group of oligarchs come in, and this comes in at the time that Putin comes in. So Putin hand selected who he gave government contracts to, and he gave them to these people who overcharged the Russian government for the different projects. And then when different political leaders tried to kick out tried to, call attention to it and tried to put a stop to it, what happened is that they gave them money. They greased their pockets, and the contracts continued to go through. And so what ended up happening is that Putin eventually is tired of it, and they are telling the oligarchs, look, you need to know your place. So this is what's going to happen. You're going to stay the fuck out of government. And there's one oligarch who didn't, and we're going to see what happened to him. He's like, you're going to stay the fuck out of government, and I'm going to allow you to keep all your ill-gotten gains that Putin gave them, by the way. So let's just not forget that Putin awarded the contracts. And then he basically said, oh, I'm going to let you keep your gains that basically you shouldn't have, for exchange of you getting the fuck out of politics. So then what happens is that Putin goes in, and he forces the oligarchs to sell back shares to the Russian government of media and natural resources. So we've talked about on the previous show that Russia is a heavy exporter of commodities, including oil and natural resources. So Putin very strategically came in and he said, hey, you guys force the oligarchs to sell back media, which they control. And of course, now there's the big hubbub because we just had the protester that worked at the most popular news station in Russia, who came out with a protest sign that said no war in English, and then in Russian said, they're lying to you. I'm sure she is in jail. Can we just talk about how ballsy the Russian people are right now? I mean, Ukrainians are ballsy, but the Russian people, to be able to stand up and protest against the war, I would hope that if the time came, I would have enough balls to do that. But I don't know, you guys. And this is going to go into what we're talking about when we're talking about Putin's inner circle. So he forces them to sell back the media, and then he turns around and he decided to give preferential treatment. Putin make laws to give preferential treatment to state-owned corporations, thus taking over the economy, thus taking control of the oligarchs. So he basically built them up and then tamed them all at the same time. And the oligarchs, they've still been okay with this, and they have they have went out into other countries where they've had political parties that were maybe friendly to Russia or friendly to communist parties, and they've donated money, thus kind of creating a debt to Russia. So even though the oligarchs technically don't, have Putin's basically running them, they're still going out and they're supporting Russia. And as we go through this, you're going to see kind of a little bit about how that shakes out. But there's some interesting facts here. So Putin technically doesn't own anything except one apartment in Moscow and a dog. Which, can you imagine being Putin's dog for a minute? Like how I fucking hope to God that if he has any humanity left in him, he shows it to that dog, because that dog, it has got to be miserable as shit. But somehow, with having no assets to his name, he is still estimated to be worth $100 billion.
Oh my God, that's obscene.
Yes, but you will see when I start going down the list of oligarchs, how fucking rich these bastards actually are. And this is stuff they can trace. Remember, because a lot of this shit is still hidden, which we're going to find out with Putin here in a second. Now, people can, a lot of people have been saying, like, we're going to put pressure on the oligarchs, and why don't they go in and they pressure Putin? Well, because Putin has a very, very, very small inner circle to the tune of about 3 people who are previous KGB agents. And so the oligarchs, for the most part, don't really have access to Putin. Putin has been working on trying to isolate himself out. And on top of all of that, the people in his inner circle are so small and so loyal that in order to just go in and assassinate him, it would have to be like a French Revolution size revolt. It's not going to be something where somebody can just, Caesar, where they all go in and they just stab him and they have access to him. And so what we see also is that we see that some people can argue that Putin does not give a fuck about the oligarchs, because most of the oligarchs have lost a tremendous amount of money. And obviously Putin does not give a shit about that, right? So the thing is that we've seen sanctions come down on the oligarchs. We've also seen sanctions come down on his kids. And we've talked about that in the pre-year episode. And so the oligarchs have been accused of spending money on their personal wealth instead of actually beefing up the military. And I'm not really sure how that works over there.
I was just going to say, in terms of funding the military and what they were supposed to do, what I've heard is, for example, they would get the funds to make 100 tanks, and they would put on the books that they'd made 100 tanks. But in reality, what they do is they'd make 10 tanks, or say 50 tanks, and then pocket the money for the other 50 tanks, so that on paper we all think that they've got 100 tanks, and but in reality there was only 50 tanks that the army has, and they pocketed the money for the other 50. So that's where they've got the money. Why the Russian forces are actually doing a lot worse than we thought that they would, because they don't have the resources, because those people have pocketed the money.
And for those of you who know your Las Vegas history, when we talked about the men who built Las Vegas on that episode, we talked about how the gangsters were skimming off the top, and that's really what got them in trouble. Las Vegas, from everything that I've seen, was actually a funner, better, more affordable place when the gangsters ran it. The problem was the Fed wasn't getting their cut. And so that was what the whole issue was. So yes. So thank you for that, Zoe, because I didn't really know how. So the oligarchs were supposed to be funding the military, and they haven't for the most part, because they're just greedy, fat fucking pigs. And we see that the Russian soldiers have come over with MREs that have expired in 2001 and 2002. MREs, for those of you who don't know military, is meals ready to eat. My father was in the military, as well as you guys know the rest of my family. And I thought it was so cool to be eating out of a pouch. And so I remember one time I had a slumber party and I had my dad bring home some MREs for us, and that was what we ate. And at the time, they didn't seem that bad, but of course, we only had to eat them once. And I have another associate who is a Vietnam vet, and he was saying that their MREs in Vietnam, when he was over there, that the Vietnamese children would come up and beg for food from them. And so they would give them, like, lima beans and stuff from the MREs, and that the little kids would throw it back at them saying, "You're a number 10 GI." And I'm like, a number 10 GI? He's like, that was just their way of, like, you're not number one, you're number two. So they would say you're a number 10 GI, and they would throw the food back at them. So this gives you on the best days how MREs actually taste. So let's get into some of the oligarchs, and I'm going to try to pronounce their names, and I'm going to say them wrong. Okay. But don't focus on that. Focus on the things that I'm telling you after. And this is an enormous list. It's not an enormous list, because I've shortened it severely, but the amount of wealth that these people have is absolutely ridiculous. So let's start with Sechin, who is estimated to be the poorest of the oligarchs, and he is estimated to be worth $2 billion. He is Putin's right-hand man, and he is considered the strategist behind the war machine. Then we have Kurdovsky, who is the richest man in Russia. He owns the largest metal manufacturer in in the world. Plus, of course, he has other holdings, as they often do when they're rich. He owns a $300 million yacht, and he transferred most of his assets to his wife's name, and the rest of his assets have been held abroad are frozen. We talked about the sanctions, or in rubles, and are now worthless, because we've talked about how severely the Russian ruble has collapsed. Then we have Timchinko, who is the owner of Russia's second largest gas producer, as well as banks and other holdings. He's considered a close friend of Putin, and he cannot leave Russia because of the fact that he is under sanctions. He also built the largest ice rink in the world for $1 billion. So he's, I believe, if I remember correctly, he's friends with the trainers of, there's the girl, there was the whole big thing, the Russian ice skater who was accused of taking a heart medication that boosts your, vitality and something else. And so he's associated with that. Then we have brothers Boris, Arcadie, and Rottenberg. Okay. They own airports and construction companies and oil and gas companies. They're childhood friends of Putin, because Putin keeps his inner circle very close, and he has been awarding them with different state money in order to make them rich. And it was just recently found out in the last couple of years, I believe, that Putin has a big estate overlooking the Black Sea. And the reason why that was hidden, because that property is actually under the brothers' names and not Putin's name. So this is where we get into, he only has an apartment and a dog, but he's worth $100 billion. Well, how the fuck is that? Well, because most of his assets are actually held by other people under their name, because again, they're all, they're close connection. We see that Arcadie's children are on the board of many companies in Russia, or at least was, and that they were before sanctions already on the list of the top richest people in Russia, kind of like Kim Kardashian. So then we have Pontonin, who is a diehard communist. He created and owned banks. He's already lost $6 billion since the Ukraine invasion started due to falling stock prices. So think Bezos over here, $126 billion, and most of his net worth is in Amazon stock. So if Amazon stock goes in the shitter, even though the man's not going to be poor by any means, he's still going to have significantly less money. He was removed from the board of trustees off of the Guggenheimer Museum in New York, and his yacht was seized by French authorities. But I was surprised, and maybe it's ignorant of me, but I was surprised to hear and know that these oligarchs, who are clearly, obviously in bed with Putin, have had any access to American boards at all. But I guess the American way is, if you have enough money, you get into where you want to go, which is, it makes me sad in a little bit. Then we have El Kaprov. Again, I know I said it wrong. I don't care. He owns Russian oil producers, and he formed a monopoly out of smaller mergers, smaller oil companies that he merged together in this major, huge monopoly conglomerate. And just to give you an idea of how rich this man is and how much this man owns in dividends last year. So when you have a stock, you have stocks that pay dividends sometimes and stocks that don't. So typically, if the company is a corporation, there's rules in which they have to pay out a certain amount of their profits. They typically pay it out in dividends, which means that you have the underlying value of the stock, but then you also have the dividends on top of it that it pays. Last year alone, in just his oil stocks, he pulled out $1.1 billion in just dividends. So he didn't sell any of his stock. He didn't do any of that, just in dividends. He made $1.1 billion. He owned a yacht with a clear bottom and a waterfall. A fucking waterfall. So this is what I'm telling you, when we're talking about how rich these fuckers actually are. He owned a yacht with a clear bottom and a waterfall. He also owns a Dutch shipyard, which I'm curious to see what happens with that, because as we talked on the last episode, Canada has started revoking export permits from Russian people and companies that do business out of Russia. And so we see that he owns a shipyard. And so we'll, like I said, it'd be interesting to see if they end up revoking those. The oil company stock that he owned has plunged 63% since the invasion of Ukraine. And it was traded until just a couple of weeks ago on the London Stock Exchange, which we talked about on the last episode, where London had allowed them to, the Russian stocks to be traded for just slightly a little bit longer until they finally put the kibosh on it. And now they can't even be traded. And the stocks, as we talked about last time, that are still on the London Stock Exchange, that are Russian stocks, are estimated to be worth pennies on the dollar. So I would garner that it's going to be a lot less, a lot more than 63% that he's going to have lost. And since the beginning of the year, he has lost $13 billion. Now, this man has $13 billion to lose. Okay. This is how rich these fuckers are, right? Then we have Yusmanov, who is the owner of the largest mining and metal conglomerate in Russia. He also owns the second largest cellular company in Russia. And he is also an investor in different investor funds. And he also owns shares in Twitter, Zynga, and Airbnb. He spent 6 years in prison due to fraud and theft. So he was accused of fraud and theft. He spent 6 years in prison. He came out of prison, and using his connections, he got money enough to open a factory making plastic bags. And then with that money and his wealth, he purchased shares in the largest gas company in Russia. And a lot of these have names associated with them, the different companies, but that's a lot of Russian for me to try to say. So you guys are going to have to look in the resources to figure that out, because I'm not going down that road. The thing that's super interesting, though, is that the Russian Supreme Court later reopened his case for what he did that he served time for and overturned it, deeming him innocent and that he was framed, which is fascinating to me. He is also owner in the football club Arsenal, and he has a villa in England and a 156-foot yacht worth $600 million that has been confiscated by England. All right. Then we have Abramovic, who is the controlling owner of a metal and mining company and the Chelsea Football Club. And Zoe touched on this on our last episode. Now, this is this guy. He had a friend who fled Russia. And then he sends Abramovich, he sends him a list. He says, hey, man, these are all of my assets in Russia. Can you help me get them back? And I don't know why he fled Russia. Well, Abramovich went to Putin and said, hey, my friend has all of these assets. What do you want? And Putin basically confiscated them for the state. And I'm going to take a wild guess and assume Abramovich took the rest of them. So these guys are just complete fucking disgusting assholes. He has estates around the world. He has an art collection alone worth $1 billion. He's been sanctioned in UK and forced to sell his shares in the Chelsea Football Club by UK. And his companies shares have lost 90% since the beginning of the war. Okay. So we saw the market drop 33% at the beginning of COVID, which was detrimental. This motherfucker has lost 90% since the beginning of the war. And if you look at that graph, it is literally bam, like it is right off a cliff. It's fucking fascinating. The British authorities have refused to renew his visa since 2018. He donated land to the Museum of Judaism and Tolerance in Moscow. He's Jewish. And that prompted Israel to send a letter to the United States asking that he be refrained from falling under sanctions. And I don't know if that worked or not, but I was just kind of like, I don't give a shit if you donated land to a religious museum. Fuck you, right? I mean, you're clearly in support of what's going on. So whatever, that's my own take on it. And like I said, I don't know if they've been spared, but Israel wrote a letter on his behalf. Must be nice. Then rounding out this list, we have Friedman, who owns banks and German companies and cellular companies in Turkey and Russia. No doubt he has seen those shares of his stock get hit. He has not been hit with sanctions by all of the countries because he is actively calling for an end to the war, which is a very dangerous place to be, which we'll see here in just a second. He is the founder of the Jewish Congress in Russia. And then we have Khan, for my Trekkies out there, you know what I'm talking about. Khan, okay, anyway, it's I think in like Star Trek 4 or 5, and he screams Khan, maybe it's 3. He is the owner in different holding groups and banks. He lives in England permanently, and the banks that he owned has fallen under the sanctions. And then we have Veckelsberg, who is a major holder in an investment group. He established the Fabergé Egg Museum in 2013. He owns homes in the United States and Switzerland, and he was under suspicion for interfering in the 2018 presidential election. And so he has been under sanction since 2018. He was removed from the board of MIT, and he has had $2 billion in assets abroad frozen. Then we have Kurdovsky, a real estate investor in US, Europe, and Russia, now he's our oligarch who is like our cautionary tale. He tried to bring democracy to Russia back in the 90s, and he gave money to 2 political forces that opposed Putin 20 years ago. Putin arrested him on, of course, trumped up charges and threw him in jail for 14 years. He received a pardon from Putin in 2013 on the basis that if he gets the pardon, he has to leave the country. And so he is technically still supposedly reported to be worth about $600 million. And obviously he's not allowed to come back to his homeland anymore. Then we have Prokhorov, who has bank holdings, who escaped sanctions because he's not considered a close Putin associate, and he owns a yacht worth $155 million. So even though he's not considered to be a close friend of Putin, we know how he got his money, right? By the backs of the government and of the other people. So he's still not a good person, even though he's not considered a close associate. Then we have Mikhail, who's the founder and owner of a gas producer, and he's currently under British sanctions. We have Volga, which is the founder of Russian Google. This is very interesting. He holds no assets outside of Russia, which means that he's probably severely broke at this point. If most of your assets are held in the ruble, at least the way the ruble is going right now, the ruble is broke. One of his companies traded on the New York Stock Exchange before they have stopped it. So he can't even get his shares out, even if he wanted to, if they were worth anything. And the company was worth $30 billion in November and now is worth less than $5 billion at the beginning of the sanctions. And then the last two we have on the list is Milner. He's the founding investor in Facebook, Twitter, Airbnb, Spotify, and Alibaba. Okay, a lot of those are American companies. He owns $100 million estate in California. He is not included in the sanctions, and he is associated with Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg. And the saddest case to me out of all of these is Durvov, who is a major holder in Telegram, which is a social media platform out of Russia known as Russian Facebook. He has been very vocal about opposing Putin, and he did not fall under sanctions, but he has no assets to be found. And he is currently in fear of his life, fleeing from Putin, staying in various Airbnbs all around the world because he's afraid if he stays in one place, Putin will have him killed. So when you're talking about why don't the oligarchs just go in and do this? Well, because Putin doesn't give a shit about the oligarchs, number one. And while we're doing wonderful things with the sanctions globally, they're affecting the oligarchs. And I'm sure that, if you have somebody who has absolute power like Putin, he can, he's always going to be okay. And obviously the three of his inner circle are going to be okay. So anyway, that would be the list of our oligarchs. Our next episode will be talking about the American basketball player that was in Russia, as well as music licensing, because we know how Russia operates, while we continue to take a deep dive into what has happened with Ukraine. So with that, make sure you follow us on social media at Finance is the Other F Word. Check out our YouTube channel at Finance is the Other F Word. You can follow me on TikTok at FTOFW_podcast. Follow Lily Lou Mittens on Instagram. And with that, we hope you guys have a good day and stay safe for our global listeners, wherever you are. And with that, we are out this bitch.
Cheerio.
Thank you for listening. If you like the show, please rate and review us and tell your friends.